All right, so hey folks, and welcome to iWizard. So today I'm here with Dr. Fantasy himself, and we're going to be talking about several things today. We'll be having a little non-spoiler, mostly non-spoiler discussion about the first book in the fantasy trilogy, The Way of Edan, and then we're going to be talking about, there it is, his experience. See, I bought it on the Kindle, and I'm actually going to purchase a physical copy because once I decide if I like a book or not, then I like to buy the physical copy as a kind of trophy, Philip. So,
Oh, wow.
um, so,
Nice. Nice.
so we'll be talking about the Way of Edan, and then we're also going to be talking about Philip's experience publishing. We'll talk about indie publishing and maybe traditional publishing and that whole side of things. So, without further ado, I want to welcome the inimitable Philip Chase. Thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, thanks, Jordan. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I really have enjoyed our past conversations a lot, and I know that you are working hard on your own book as we speak almost. I'm sure the thoughts about it are churning in your mind all the time. That
They
creative
are like demons
process.
haunting me. Yes.
Yeah, so there is a real pleasure in talking with a fellow writer about the craft and about storytelling, and I feel that we, in particularly in the indie community, but authors in general, we can be so supportive of one another. So this is something that I really enjoy doing.
Well, I appreciate it. There's a famous Cormac McCarthy quote about how what does he say? He says something to the effect of having read like 20 books in common with another person is a bond more enduring than blood. And I was like, oh my God,
Wow.
Cormac, that's like a little over the top. And then over time, I realized that was kind of true. If you like
Yeah.
actually share a reading taste with someone, it actually you have endless things to talk about. And I found that that's true about like budding writers with a similar kind of ethos as well, is
Yeah.
that, and I think especially when you start moving toward indie publishing and the experiences that you have. So
Yeah.
Philip, thank you for being here. And I actually just want to start by saying that I absolutely loved this book. You
Oh,
have
thank
a
you.
new champion here for this series.
Oh,
I thought this was just everything I really want in a modern fantasy novel. The religious themes, the Northern European inspired elements, the scheming, complex, conniving like wizards and priests, and the quest, but also the sort of Game of Thrones aspect
mhm.
of it that you see from time to time. Also, just the traditional story dynamics and the sort of unabashed epic fantasy tropes that you see in there, which to me, tropes, archetypes, nods to great stories of the past. These aren't insults for me. When done well, this is what I like to see. So, anyways, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the book, and so this is going to be the next book that I do a full review of. So just look out for that. So I hope folks enjoy that. So I wanted to say thank you and really like good job. I guess this just connected with me. I've seen like mostly positive reviews of your book. Some 4 star. This was like this is what I want in fantasy. So this hit everything for me. So I just
Oh,
wanted to tell you that this really worked for me. And so I just want to say congrats on publishing this. I know it's been like over a year now, and I want to say that you have a big new fan. And I will be continuing on. I said, publicly on my channel, on my TBR that we'll see if I like the first book. I'm not going to commit to a whole trilogy. I really liked it, and so I'm going to keep going. And I can't wait to see what happens. So.
well, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it very much.
It
And
wasn't just good, it was great. I
oh,
really, really liked it.
that makes me very happy, of course, to hear. And I do think that this is true of any book, really, is that there is going to be an audience that really appreciates it and gets it and understands it. And then there are going to be
Yes.
people who love fantasy who don't necessarily like epic fantasy or
Right.
traditional fantasy or whatever it is. Maybe they don't like Holy War or whatever,
Right. Right.
we have our personal quirks, and maybe they don't like the slightly archaic language that I
Right.
use or whatever it might be. So it's not going to resonate with every reader, but what you have to take are those victories when your story does resonate with a person, it does reach the audience that
Yes.
is able
Correct.
at that particular time and place to appreciate the story. And that's, I think, one thing that I've had to learn as a writer is to appreciate those victories,
Yeah.
because you're going to have those people who like what you're doing, and you're going to have some who don't, and that's okay. That's really okay. You have to
Totally.
roll with that, and I think savor the times when you get a reader who reaches out and says, "Hey, I just had somebody write the most wonderful comment to me a couple days ago in one of my videos. He had read my 3 books during I guess wherever he was living, there were terrible floods. And what he wrote to me was that the only thing I was doing was helping other people and reading your books during these floods. And he ended by telling me that the Return to Edan, the third book in the trilogy, was the first book that ever made him cry. And
Wow.
yeah, and I was just blown away by that comment, and how, wow, this story really, it can. I mean, this is, of course, what I wanted to do when I set out writing, was to connect with people and have them feel this story the same way I felt Tolkien when I was a 12-year-old, and felt that sense of catharsis at the end of Return of the King, and just had my mind. I didn't know what catharsis was, but I felt it when a kid. And that's what I always wanted to do ever since then, was to be able to do that for someone else, and to have a reader reach out and say, yeah, this really just, it spoke to me. It's so fulfilling. It is just the most wonderful feeling you'll ever have. And I know
Yeah.
you're going to have it too when you
I hope
publish.
so.
Yeah, I'm quite sure you will. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah, but it's interesting because I thought to myself that the experience we've had with publishing, I said, I really need to start getting into indie. So many of the people I respect and listen to are heading that way and are reviewing these indie books and are talking about them with reverence and with kind of glowing praise. And I had to say, I had to reckon with my own sort of bias against indie. It wasn't overt, it was totally subconscious. I
Sure.
didn't have any negative feelings toward it. I didn't think indie authors were less talented or anything like that. It's more like it's easy to read traditional. It's in your
Yeah.
face. It's put like right in front of you. I'm an English and philosophy teacher. So I go to Barnes and Noble all the time. Those books generally aren't there. And it's the
Right.
world that I was living in. And so I was like, I need to start reading more indie, and I think Philip's great, and I watch his stuff. So this would be a logical place for me to start. And so we'll give that a go, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
And what once I read it, I thought, okay, well, this is a book that I might have picked up at Barnes and Noble if it was there when I went, and I would have really liked it. And I would have wanted to champion it on my channel. And so it suddenly became not about indie anymore, but just this is a great book. And
Yeah.
so, and again, it's just the stuff. Again, some of this stuff bores some people, like the way that you write and the style and the themes and the religion and the influences and the language choices. But for me, it was just hitting on everything, and there was constant pinging in my brain as I was reading. Oh, I recognize this from. Oh, I taught Beowulf for 3 years, and I feel like
Yeah.
I recognize the
A lot of
name Blue
Beowulf in
Raven,
there.
but I
Yeah.
feel like maybe I don't know. I don't think so. I go back and check, and yes, this is like a little minor like reference in Beowulf to some guy that he killed. And so
Yep.
it was just all those things constantly on in every chapter. But let's start, Philip, with this question. This is the most boring sort of boilerplate author question in the world, but I imagine that much of my audience hasn't picked up this book yet. what made you want to become a fantasy author? And more specifically, what made you want to write this series? As I was reading this book, I found myself thinking about you because I know you, but also because you're a medievalist and a professor. Did you have something that you wanted to say in terms of the religious themes? Is there a story
Mhm.
that you've always wanted to tell, or did it start as more of just you writing this book and deciding to actually go for this? Was it more of an identity thing, wanting to emulate Tolkien or sort of be the type of person who is a fantasy novelist? You can never discount identity. That it's extremely powerful. Sometimes you begin something because you want to be the type of person who is a fantasy author. So, what gave rise to you deciding to do this? What was the reason that you wrote this series?
Yeah, a lot of my answers to this question is something that I can construct in retrospect, I guess. Because I mentioned being a 12-year-old reading Tolkien and having my mind blown and really actually feeling like at that age, I want to do this. This is what I want to do with my life. I want to write stories like this that will speak to people in this way. And I didn't know how to go about doing that at all, but I knew that Tolkien had done it for me. And so I was determined to somehow or other achieve this. And I can remember in eighth grade, at the age of 13, when our school had us meet with a person of a profession that we thought we might like to pursue. So, some kid says, I want to be a firefighter, and they put him with the fire department for the day, or
Yeah,
I want to be
yeah.
a nurse, and whatever it might be. So I said I want to be a writer, and the poor administrators at my rural Vermont high school had to find a writer somewhere. But they found one, a guy named David Budbill, whom I actually knew as a sort of local celebrity, more as a playwright, but he's published novel. He's passed away since, but he published novels and poems, and he did a variety of genres. But anyway, he was kind enough to meet with me, and we had a great conversation. He was very, very supportive of my desire to be a writer. But one of the very first things he said to me was, yeah, it's really wonderful that you want to do this, but I really have to emphasize that you're going to need a day job, most likely. You're going to need some way of feeding yourself, because for most people who do this, writing alone is not enough.
Well, Philip, but just sorry to interrupt. We, as a professor, that's sort of a noble, almost tradition at this point. So it would be one thing if you were like a landscaper or like a gas station attendant or something like that. But like, there's a long tradition of like professors writing on the side. Not saying you can't do any kind of profession and then write. Of course you can, but it almost seems natural that that if you're gonna have if you're going to have a day job, so to speak, that it's one that actually kind of feeds into the writing and fuels that.
Precisely. And I'd love to say that this was some genius plan of mine, but really I kind of just fell into this over the years, and this is me in retrospect making sense of it. But you're exactly right that being an English professor and a medievalist allowed me to read the kind of stories that I wanted to inform my own story writing. And that was probably subconsciously, maybe even partly consciously, me trying to go on the path of Tolkien, because as you know, he was also a medievalist. And I learned a lot of the same languages that he studied, and I have a tweed jacket. And I mean, and I love Oxford, although I was not lucky enough to attend school there. But yeah, I think that there was a lot of that pulling me along, perhaps, on the path that I went. But I also, at a certain age, actually, after I did my master's degree, between my master's degree and my PhD, I had the incredible opportunity to live in Nepal and to travel all over Nepal and India. That's a really important moment in my life. Now, I've lived abroad before. I lived in Germany when I was a kid, and I moved around a lot. But this was an experience that really, in the best possible ways, challenged me and made me grow and helped me to appreciate that I have this beautiful connection to every place in the world, to people everywhere. And that, yes, there are differences, but there are commonalities to be explored, and finding that oneness and that sameness. And I'm a huge admirer of the philosophical aspects of Hinduism and Buddhism. And I spent my time, I was teaching at a university in Kathmandu for a year at Tribhuvan University in the English department.
Wow.
But I was also studying at the same time. I was reading. I read the Mahabharata and I read the Ramayana. And I read some of the philosophical things and lived there among Nepalis. I did not live like a tourist. I lived with a Nepali family and ate with them and experienced life over there. And it was absolutely life altering in the best possible way. And what I wrote in this trilogy would not be, I wouldn't have written this trilogy without that experience. I have to emphasize that, from let's say the way the magic works in my trilogy is very much informed by Hinduism and Buddhism. I'm sure you might probably noticed that as you were reading, and that you'll see more and more as you continue reading. My take on elves, for example, is almost a very Buddhist notion.
Yeah, oh,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, Philip, I'm always hyper alert to this because, and we might have talked about this before, but I minored in Asian studies and Southeast Asian studies actually, and I did my honors thesis in my undergrad on Vasubandhu, who was the ancient Indian monk philosopher,
Yeah,
on his Trisva Bhava Nirdesha, the treatise on the three natures, and I compared it to the Western philosopher, the German idealist Arthur Schopenhauer. So that
brilliant.
was my undergraduate, and so I took Buddhist ethics, Buddhist metaphysics, Japanese art and architecture. I took so many courses in Asian studies, and it's always been in fact, that tower that you see back there, the red tower, that is almost all Asian studies books. The
Cool.
Dhammapada and the Madhyamaka school, Nagarjuna's
Yeah.
books and stuff like that. So I'm a big fan of Eastern philosophy, Eastern like analytic philosophy, Yogacara, idealism, Zen, all that stuff. So it's been a while, but so when I'm reading, Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea, I'm noticing
Taoism.
Taoist
Yeah.
themes, right? So I appreciate that about you and about the book as well. It really hit for me, for sure.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, and there are various cultures that I portray in this world, and
Yep.
the Andumaic cultures are in part based on South Asia, and the language you won't actually see it until I think the second book. But if a Nepali or Hindi speaker were to see those words, they would probably say, "I kind of know what that means there." The
Thing.
language that say Sequara speaks.
Oh, right.
You
Yes.
don't have it in this book because you have her POV all the time. But when you have in the second book a person who is not her being the POV and hearing her and another person speaking in that language, I have it written in something that resembles a mangled form of Nepali or Hindi or something like that. So
Great. Great. So I will give one spoiler to folks. I said this would be non-spoiler, but I just wanted to say something I've never seen before. Um, that you started out the book with a prologue, and you like immediately killed the dude I thought might be one of the main characters. And so I was like, okay, cool. That's fine. That happens. And then I open up the first chapter and then I meet this other guy and I'm like, oh, he could be a good character. He's our guy. At least you won't kill him. We know that because how could you? You just killed off a guy in the prologue. Oh my God, that guy's dead too. You also killed him. And so then I'm like, okay, there's a new character, and I better not get too attached to him because whoever this is probably going to die.
yeah. Well, detachment, right? That's part of Buddhism.
That's right. The origin of suffering is desire and attachment and craving.
Right.
So knowing that and knowing you, I had to, okay, let's just wait and see.
Yeah. I mean, there is a kind of a statement being made. I think that's your prologue is an opportunity to make a statement. Like
Oh
here are
yeah,
some important
yeah,
themes. Here's what to expect. Here's the tone maybe of this story. And I am setting up the holy war that is the backdrop to this whole thing there
yes,
in that prologue. And I wanted to show that this is an event that is going to have repercussions that will ripple all over this continent. That
yes,
war is something that doesn't happen just in the place where it's happening. It affects lives. Of course, those who are in the midst of the warfare are affected the most, but it affects lives all over the place.
Right. Right.
And I was trying to portray that this has consequences that are very tragic
Yes.
for individual lives, and also in the second chapter, I deliberately, so you have in the prologue three martyrs. You have in the very first chapter a boy who was tragically killed because of the activities of a powerful kingdom that is gearing up for war. And then in the second chapter, you have Sequara off in Astralad, and she saves a child's life. And that was me deliberately trying to set up a kind of a contrast there,
Yes.
juxtaposing that with what happened in the previous chapter.
Yes.
And there's, a statement not only about her character and trying to build up her character and tell you what she's all about, but on a bigger level, what's at stake here. So.
All right. So tell me, I want to talk about some of the religious themes here. Um, I remember Tolkien, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Tolkien once said something to the effect of, and this could be apocryphal, but I learned this from the medievalist and Tolkien guy, Michael D.C. Drought, and he said something to the effect of that Tolkien wrote, or at least started writing, Lord of the Rings to have a place to showcase his invented language, to invent a world and characters that would give life to his languages. And I was thinking about how that was kind of true with me too. With our fantasy book, I personally love grappling with philosophical, political, and religious ideas. I teach, as you know, philosophy for a living, and I love political philosophy and intellectual history. And I realized that I wanted to create a fictional world that would allow me to play these ideas off of one another and,
Yeah.
watch nations clash. I remember the idea for this book came to me when I was reading Nietzsche, and I said to myself, my goodness, um, what if I took Nietzsche and fused him with like Saruman and added in like a dash of like Tony Stark or Elon Musk? Wouldn't that make for a terrific evil
Wow.
Dark Lord figure? I'm not saying that Elon Musk is a super villain or anything. I just wanted my bad guy to have that kind of visionary quality. And so, yeah, I wanted to make my book a sort of intellectual epic, a great conversation, which is funny because in getting AP's comments back, he's like, guys, the philosophy stuff is interesting and all, but you might want to like get to the story and pay attention to like the story arc.
AP
Um,
being AP Canavan, who is my developmental editor and your developmental editor.
Yes,
So yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. And part of my decision was because you had chosen him. And so I thought, well, if Philip did it, then and that turned out okay, then I'm going to that's what
Yeah.
I want to do. But that's what I
AP is
wanted to
AP is
ask you.
brilliant. He's really just top notch.
He really is.
Yeah,
He
he's just
really is.
one of the best. Yeah.
Just a total professional, very smart, very logical person, and
Yeah.
someone who seems to care about the virtues of excellence and doing a good job and doing what he's supposed to do for you over
Yeah.
anything else. And so I've had a really good experience with him, and I'm now trying to like wrap my head around all the comments. We just got
Yeah.
the edits back, so
That's an exciting moment. A
it's an
nerve-wracking and
exciting
exciting and everything.
it's
But
exciting
you have homework.
and sad, but also like that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
you have to be a little humble there. But
Yep.
I've really enjoyed working with him. But that's what I wanted to ask you about. I was talking about my inspiration for you is did the religious ideas come first? I was mentioning that Tolkien quote, or was it something you injected in the story once you devised the story? Did you have something you wanted to say about religion, or was there this story that you had in your head, and then the religious stuff was, oh, well, that's just icing on top of the cake?
It was not icing for me. It was really at the heart of the story from the beginning, I would say.
Yeah.
And these are things that I wanted to explore in a fantasy setting for sure. These are because I had lived uh, a life where I had come, not that I was ever, I don't think I was ever consciously, bigoted or dismissive of other people. but I certainly had come to appreciate through that experience of living in Nepal, and I return to it all the time, by the way, because I married into a Nepali family, and which is, by the way, one of the coolest things in the world. Being a Nepali son-in-law is awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I have in the course of my life, I think, appreciated more and more, or learned to respect other people more and more through my interactions. It was eye-opening for me to live abroad in that way, and I wanted to explore that experience on some level. And maybe I not entirely consciously, though. Again, in retrospect, I look back on the writing of this trilogy. I think I was probably trying to work out my own feelings about the religion I grew up in, which I didn't. I don't practice any faith. I don't adhere to any institutionalized religion at this point in my life. But I still have a lot of affection for the traditions that I grew up in, and I never had that moment of just outright rebellion, but I definitely sort of felt myself gradually drifting away and realizing I don't actually
Yes.
believe these things that I'm told that I'm supposed to believe. Um, I can remember even as a kid feeling like, no, I don't think hell is real. I don't, and I grew up, hearing about this and being taught to fear it, and at a certain point being a kid and thinking, I don't really believe in this. And then just gradually more and more of these things just kind of slipping away from me. So I wanted to explore this because it is something that is dear to me in a way that is part of essential to who I am, but something that I didn't consciously reject, but I don't feel a part of anymore. And I guess I'm exploring some of the things that I felt were problematic, certainly in the history, not
Mhm.
just the history, though, even in the way that some people who call themselves Christians conceive of the world, even today. I have my disagreements, even though many of those people are just lovely individuals who do wonderful things with their lives. There are certain aspects, and I try to portray that in the book as well. There are characters in
There's
here.
real nuance, Philip.
I hope so, because there are characters in here who really believe that what they're doing is saving the world, and from another person's perspective, what they're doing is incredibly destructive. But Bledla, for example, is a character
Yes.
who absolutely believes that what he is doing is Edan's will and is for the good of the people that he is persecuting. He really believes that. And then there are others who are maybe a little more nuanced in a way, like Arna, who is a high priest who wants to spread this religion because he also believes that it's essential for the salvation of humanity, but he
I
doesn't believe
loved Arna,
violence.
by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. He doesn't believe violence is the way to do it. So he has that disagreement with his friend that he's very conflicted about. And then there are others who, like King Erkenwald, are completely self-serving, who are using this religion as an excuse. They say the pious words, but it's all just lip service, and what they really want is to empower themselves. And
Right.
I think you can find all of this in the history of just about any religion, really.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Correct. Yeah, and my evil super Nietzschean villain is he is someone who, and the only thing that makes him different from Nietzsche is that he believes in the real religion of the seven gods. In my story, the seven gods are actually real,
yeah,
and so he believes that he believes that they exist, but he thinks that they're working through him, and that he's do. And I felt a similar thing with Bledla in your book,
absolutely.
and this question of who is the chosen one, and is there a chosen one, and all of that. But yeah, Philip, I grew up Jewish.
Uh-huh.
We're Ashkenazi Jews, and
Yeah.
I was I went to Jewish private schools until fifth grade when my parents got divorced, and then just ordinary public school.
Yeah.
But I was bar mitzvahed and had to learn Hebrew and all of these things. And my story is very similar to you. I didn't just turn into this rebellious, like angsty teenager who rejected the faith.
Right.
Over time, I just became lapsed. And
Okay.
fell away from it. And then you go to college and you start having debates with people and you read Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion. And I
Yeah.
went through this transformation of becoming this like secular humanist, atheist, materialist. And gradually over time, I've come back.
Yeah.
And I really don't know where I stand. My wife is Catholic, but I feel like I'm LARPing if I go that way. And I do love aspects of Christianity and
Yeah.
respect and revere the Judeo-Christian tradition and its fruits, but
Right.
also you feel like a traitor. And so
Mhm.
it's this very interesting. I'm very much a modern Western man who is like, the rug's been pulled out from under me. What am I supposed to believe now?
Yeah.
And so
Well,
I
that's
just really appreciated your exploration and interaction with religion. You have the Way, which is this like new religion, and this like
200 years old. Yeah.
yeah, monotheistic, but very similar to aspects of my book as well. You have the what is it? The Dwergs.
Yep.
They like worship their sisters, and they're
Their
like
ancestors, their ancestor worship.
yes,
Yeah.
the
They don't
ancestor
have
worship.
gods. Yeah.
The sort of earth ancient ones, the earthy religion. You have the
Yes.
Andu. What is it? The Andume.
The Andumai. Yes.
Andumai.
Yes. They have a dualistic religion. Yeah.
There's two
Mother and
gods.
father. Yep. Mother and father. Yeah.
Um, and so it was. How did you come up with that, Philip?
Wow. I suppose there must be a dose of Taoism in that, because the mother and the father, she's life, he's death, and that kind of yin
Yin
yang
yang.
sort of thing. Um, there's a lot of, as I said before, though, a lot of South Asian influence in the Endomaic culture in general, and their understanding of magic and how it works, and the idea essentially being that we are connected with everything, that we are one manifestation of the life that underlies all things, and that connection is what allows magic to happen in this particular world. That we are both connected and that we are impermanent in the sense that this individual manifestation is not always going to be around. When I die, I'll return to the energy from which all life springs, that kind of thing. So that I think is a huge part of how they view life, and how their faith informs their worldview. That's a big part of the Endomaic cultures. Whereas the Torlanders and the Markmen and the Elenders, the people of the North, who came from a more Germanic kind of root kind of feeling culture, they come from a polytheistic tradition where they have all these gods that feel very similar to
Pantheon of
Thor and
gods.
Odin and all of that. Yeah, that the typical Indo-European pantheon of gods who can be quite violent and can be very selfish and conniving and all of those things. But
Fickle.
300 or so years before this story takes place, you had one of these individuals who was able to use magic, who came up with this revolutionary new idea that actually, no, there's only one God. All these are just facets or faces of the one God, and that he called Edan. And that faith has been spreading, especially in Torland, as a kind of a new monotheistic understanding of life. And it might be the case that Aldman's original vision has changed over the centuries. That this idea that of aggressive conversion is something that he would have been horrified by. But who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is I knew just from watching your videos and knowing you and going into it that there was going to be some, Eastern philosophy influence, maybe Taoism. And then looking at the title of the book, The Way of Edan, Edan, sorry. You
Well,
say
either way, it's fine. I'm not
okay.
picky. Yeah.
I thought, okay, he's doing that's the Taoist religion. I thought that's going to be
Yeah.
because the way, the road, do, the way. Uh, so I actually kind of thought that was going to be that, but
That's the aggressive monotheistic one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But actually, what's incredible is there was only like one really negative thing I had about your book, which is that you stole two of the names that I wanted to use in my
Oh
book.
no.
Now I worry I'm going to have to change them. Yes, you wrote this book first. Yes, this book goes back a long way, but I still contend, Philip, that you stole them from me, because I'm just I want to get what I want and all that, and so I'm reading your book and I see Galdor,
And you're
and I
like,
say,
damn it. Yeah.
oh. Oh my gosh, I thought I was being clever. Magic, Old English.
Old English for
Galdor,
magic.
that's
Yeah.
my big like Merlin type wizard.
Although, you know what? You know who actually preempted both of us on that? Tolkien.
Who?
Tolkien has a character named Galdor.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Minor character in the
yes.
Silmarillion, but
Yes.
still he did use the name.
And then Alwyn as
Aha.
well.
Yeah.
In fact,
That's an old English name. Yeah.
I'm not changing that from my
Yeah, because
book.
that's a tiny character from my
I'm
book.
not changing that because there's Alwyn's Ale in my book,
Oh, you need to
and
keep that. Yeah.
I have to keep it. Sorry. So no, but it was nice to see nuanced priest and wizard characters who have conflicted motivations, because I'll tell you, Philip, for as much as I absolutely love traditional fantasy, and for as much as Lord of the Rings probably always will be my like favorite fantasy novel, one thing I do tend to enjoy about modern fantasy is that you can't always take people at face value.
Right.
In traditional fantasy, the good guy is usually shot through with goodness. The bad guy is like Dr. Evil, right? He's evil for the sake of being evil. The religious guy is earnest in his faith. He's a true believer. But with modern fantasy and with your book, you have priests who don't even really believe or care about the faith. They have other interests and motivations. They're outwardly saying things out loud to support the politics of the way, which is what a lot of people do, which is what we all do, where inside they're thinking the exact opposite. You've got modern feeling creatures in your book and stuff like that as well. So there's a traditional feel too with the sources that you use and the stories and the songs and the poems that you weave in, and the different languages that you're incorporating there. So what I wanted to know is, how did you strike that balance? Is it something that you did consciously? Because there's very much an almost Game of Thrones sort of modern cynical feel, but there's also that traditional. You feel like there's still room for goodness and earnestness and real heroes and stuff like that. Was that something you did on purpose? How did you strike that balance?
Yeah. I think it's both on purpose and just something I couldn't help doing because Tolkien and Le Guin they're in my DNA. They're deep in my bones. They're books. I grew up with them and I think that just no matter what I write, they're going to be in there somewhere, somehow. But at the same time, before I sat down to write these books, I also realized I need to know what modern fantasy is doing because just maybe Tolkien is not exactly in fashion anymore. So maybe I should know what actually is being published now. And, so I read A Song of Ice and Fire before I started writing. I tried to read up a little bit more. I think that trying to think of what I actually started reading before I started writing. I started writing this in 2004. And
Oh, okay.
then,
When was
yeah,
Malazan published? When was
it was
Gardens of
published, but okay, so in the case of Malazan, the first two books I wrote before I read Malazan. So I cannot claim that Malazan
Right,
has any kind of influence on them, except maybe in the editing.
right.
The third book, which I feel, if you're a Malazan reader and you're also a Tolkien reader, you're going to see that, oh yeah, he read Malazan, because I feel that. And I've actually told Stephen Erickson this. Reading Malazan freed my imagination in a
Mhm.
way that I really feel helped me to hit my stride in a way in the third book. I don't get me wrong, I do love books one and two, and I think that book three wouldn't exist without them. But I'm really happy with how book three came out, and I have to give Stephen Erickson at least some credit for that because I do feel that reading Malazan helped, as I said, to free my imagination, and just reading Malazan made me realize, oh, you can do this in fantasy. Okay,
Yes.
that's cool, and it encouraged me to kind of take chances, to take risks in my storytelling that I think is going to surprise a lot of people if they get to book three. That book three is maybe even by the time you get to the end of book two, you're going to be, well, what is he doing? And in book three, I do something that you don't see all that often in fantasy. And I think that it seems to have paid off, at least in terms of what some readers have told me and how they've experienced the story. So, yeah. But yeah, so I do have my influences, and some of them are older and some are much more modern. I read A Song of Ice and Fire for sure, and I know that that was probably a reason for not just the moral grayness that you might see in there, or the violence, the brutality, the honesty in terms of the violence, because I feel that one thing that I do appreciate about even say grimdark, or more the kind of fantasy that became more prominent in the early 2000s, where you do have a more honest portrayal of violence and how visceral and horrifying it can be. I included that in my story as well. So that's there. Other writers that I read later, but may have informed, in revision at least, would be like Joe Abercrombie, Mark Lawrence, writers like that. I think that they would have solidified some of the influence from George R. Martin in there, for sure. But yeah, and also Martin's, you're going to see, as if you continue in the series, that there are more POVs if with each book, and each book is longer. So I feel like maybe Martin's style in A Song of Ice and Fire of having the different POVs, and he has more POVs with each book, and to the point where he had to split, the books at a certain point in the series. That might also have been nudging me, although I think it's fairly common to have limited omniscient narrator that switches from chapter to chapter or section to section in terms of the perspective character. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought you
Yeah.
did well with that, and that was very elegant as well. And yeah, I'm kind of like you. I'm a big time lover of traditional fantasy,
Mhm.
Tolkien, but I'm also a huge. I've said over and over again that George R. R. Martin is my favorite modern fantasy writer. He's my
Yeah.
favorite
Yeah.
fantasy writer of the 21st century, and so there is a kind of yin yang with that. That I felt your book straddled very well. Your book was like the dot at each side of the yin and yang. So
Yeah, good.
um,
Otherwise, I suppose, I mean, it could come across as a sort of neurosis of trying to bring the two together, right?
No, it worked really well and it felt natural and organic. I really just love too that the book isn't just themeless and directionless. I remember I was on Christopher Rocchio's channel about a year ago, and I was with the fantasy author Dave Butler, and he did a roundtable, and the topic was something like what makes for great fantasy, which is a great topic. And I
Wow.
remember saying to them that one of the things that makes for great fantasy literature is what I called at the time a world worth saving. I can't tell you how much fantasy today throws you into a world. You meet the main characters, they're sword fighting or they're preparing for their trial, their rite of passage into adulthood, and you learn that there's this, magic, and there's this Dr. Evil bad guy, and they're not given, you as the reader, I guess, are not given a sense of what the good is, what the characters are fighting for, and why it's worth fighting for. Like what
You need
moral,
stakes. Yeah.
yes, what are the stakes, and what moral notions are we willing to die for? Why
Mm.
is the village that I live in worth dying for? What religion are we fighting for, and what is our connection to that? Like, what is justice? Why is the bad guy doing what he's doing? All of that stuff. And I was telling the guys at the time when I did that, I was reading a book called, or I was reading the Edan Trilogy by James Islington. And again, I did a whole review. I liked that book a lot. It was entertaining, and it reminded me to some degree of the Wheel of Time. The plot was engaging. The magic system was cool. And I literally, they call them beach read books. I literally read that on the beach and had a great
Oh,
time with it. But my big criticism was that I had no idea what anyone stood for. And he's probably a more talented writer than I am. But so I'm not trying to I'm definitely not trying to dump on him, because I really enjoyed that book. But I had no idea what anyone stood for, why they're willing to endure the hardships they're willing to endure, why it all mattered, I guess, essentially. And I didn't feel that way once with your book. So I don't mean to compliment you by insulting like another book, because Islington is seriously a talented author. But I wanted to say that your book is, again, I'm like gushing on your book here. It is kind of why I read fantasy, basically, and I want more of this kind of thing. It's not just pew pew, right, or just like one meaningless battle scene after another, or long masturbatory explanations of people melting coins. Like, your book has both the fun and the adventure that I was looking for, but it also does have an intellectual heft. But it was never heavy-handed, which is what I struggle with, right? Which is these
That's
long
hard.
didactic, almost Ayn Randian, not the philosophy, but the heavy-handedness with the philosophy
Yeah.
being prominent versus the story. And so that's something I have to fix with my book before it gets published. But um, are, what I want to ask you is, um, what I guess you talked about this a little bit earlier, but what are the main authors that inspired the way that you write, setting Tolkien aside? Like,
Uh-huh.
who were the main people that gave you the ammo and the sort of firepower to do what you did? Because I'm not someone who believes that you can just create originality out of nothing. I think it was Descartes who said something to the effect of, and he was talking about fantasy. He was talking about, like, he actually said in one of his journals or one of his writings, he said something to the effect of, as a human being, you can't create a new original like fantasy animal. It's always going to be based on the parts of other animals. This is a
Mhm.
very, although he was a rationalist, this is a very empiricist point of view, which is, if you haven't experienced a thing before, you actually don't have the cognitive tools in order to create something with the parts of what you've seen. So his point was, it is impossible to be technically completely original. It's almost like music, right? You can't write a song that is totally original because you have to have heard all the notes before.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to know, like, what inspired you? What your fantasy novel? What parts is it made up of? What did
Mhm.
you bring together to create this new thing? Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I will just briefly talk about the what you were referring to a little bit earlier in terms of the how much philosophy, how much action, how do you, and the answer is going to be different for every reader, honestly. I tried in my second book, The Prophet of Edan, to actually increase the pacing. It's a longer book, but I wanted to make it. Uh, the first book is really the setup for the War of the Way, and then the second book is the War of the Way. And you can imagine there's going to be some violence, there's some action there, and for some readers it was too much action, and I felt that I was weaving the more philosophical moments and trying to balance them with the action. And you never know. You know, some people are going to be, I loved how fast this was, and others are going to be like, oh, that was too much action. You have to just do what feels right to you ultimately, what you believe is the right balance and the kind of book that you would want to read. And hope that there are people out there who would feel similarly, I think. But in regard to the various influences that came in here, I've mentioned Tolkien, Le Guin, and George R. R. Martin is big. And later on, I would say Mark Lawrence and Joe Abercrombie and um, Robert Jordan, maybe to some degree, I would say. I did read Wheel of Time, but after, again, it was after I wrote the first two
Oh,
books.
did you read all those books?
I read
Yeah.
all of the Wheel of Time. I finished it in the year that Brandon Sanderson finished the last book. In fact, I got the last book brand new from the library because I
Yeah.
was using the library at the time, right when it was published. So that my timing was perfect to finish the series. I had started it maybe about a year before, and I
Wow.
was able to
Yeah.
read. So that was when I read Wheel of Time. So it was definitely after I started. I had written the first two books, but. Um, and they're all there, but what I'd like to say is my studies as a medievalist, I cannot possibly overestimate how things like Beowulf do really inform what I'm doing here. Thematically, if you look at Old English poetry, it is all about the fleetingness of life. It is all about the loss of friends and family and valuables and the process of reconciling oneself to letting go. And, and in many ways, the pagan Germanic heroic response to all of that, to the void that you're staring at, is do great deeds so the bard will sing about you for a couple generations,
Yeah, and
and
in ancient Greece they called this kleos,
yep,
right? The Iliad's a kleos epic, whereas the Odyssey is a nostos epic,
right,
nostos, nostalgia, coming home, right?
yeah.
Yeah, you see this in a lot of cultures. Yeah,
Yep, yep. So I'm exploring that, and then of course, as we indicated earlier, the Buddhist and the Hindu influences there, and their response to mortality being more along the lines of, well, recognize that you're ephemeral and that you're going to return. I love the analogy that Thich Nhat Hanh illustrated in a book of his that I read called "The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching." And essentially, he compared the individual to a wave on the surface of the water. We're all these
right,
happy little waves, and we think we're separate from the rest of the water, but
right,
really, the little wave is about to become part of the water again. And it really always was part of the
right.
water.
Or in Zen, it's a drop in the ocean, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm kind of exploring that. Whereas, in a religion like the Way, the answer is to do what God tells you and bring about the world that your God wants to be brought about, and you'll have a place in an afterlife,
right,
as your individual self will continue to exist in some form, right?
right,
Uh, that's their answer, so
right.
have faith, and that kind of thing. So there are all these approaches to mortality, and I think that's something I was exploring in there. But the Old English and the Old Norse material, they pervade this trilogy in so many ways. From little nods, I have a lot of Old English in there, a lot of
Yeah.
Old Norse, and some of it is just me being, winking at myself. Like there's a river that runs through Torhelm, and it's called the River Ea. In Old English, Ea means river, so it's the river. It's my little
Yes.
joke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it seems like in terms of world building, speaking of what you were just talking about in names and places and the
Mhm.
language use, that this has a clear sort of inspiration in an almost Tolkien-esque sense. I'm reading places in your book, Iltharwen and Andume and the
Yeah.
Folkwater and the Song of Origin, right? And you've got the elves and the dwergs, or however you pronounce it. You're the old English guy.
It's good. Yeah.
And I would say too that you can almost just tell, given the rhythms of your writing and the way that the language is used and the way that the characters within your story tell their own stories, you can just sort of tell that this book was written by someone who has read Beowulf and who has studied it deeply. So I want to just go off of what you were just talking about and ask you, like, what approach did you take with the language here? I'm detecting Anglo-Saxon, so Old English, Norse, Welsh, definitely,
Oh yeah,
and
Welsh.
some Celtic. I could be wrong about that, but
Yep.
where did you draw that from, and what was your I mean, you Folkmoot and Doomring and Vergeld and the Old English bards, right?
Shope.
You call them shapers,
Yes, which is what the word means. Shope essentially means
shops,
shaper. Yeah.
and so yeah, so how did you decide what you were going to do with that? And I guess how did you decide like, because Tolkien had to make his own decisions on what
Mhm.
everything was going to be. What was your thinking on that, Philip?
Yeah. So first of all, one of the things that Tolkien, I think, can teach us is linguistic consistency.
Yeah.
It to me, and maybe a lot of people will disagree with this, and I would like to point to Ursula Le Guin's essay from Elfland to Poughkeepsie as sort of backup on this. But for me, linguistic consistency is important. And if you look at Tolkien's cultures in Middle Earth, there's linguistic consistency in terms of the sounds. He just doesn't throw a cool name on the map and say, yeah, this sounds cool. And I think you can tell when fantasy writers haven't done their homework and they just think, all right, cool name, let's slap this here, put this
Right.
here, with little or no regard as to the linguistic consistency.
Yes.
Because, we make certain sounds in English that, say, a Nepali speaker would not make.
And
But
it's
they
not
make
arbitrary.
That's right. It's pretty arbitrary. Whereas they make sounds that we can't hear or can't form anymore because we lost those sounds from, our language doesn't have them.
The great vowel shift or whatever.
Yes, yes, yeah. Don't get me distracted with that
No,
because
sorry. Go
I'd go
ahead.
on and on with that one. But anyway, yeah, I mean, essentially, a given language, there are certain sounds that will be prominent, that will be present, and then some that won't. And a kind of a feel for a culture depends on that linguistic consistency, I feel. So I did base the cultures in the Southwest on a Celtic vibe and language. When you hear Adanese or Cargilese spoken, it sounds like a mangled form of Welsh, which I learned when I was younger. I learned Welsh. So I was
Wow.
able to draw from that. And I also did the same thing with the culture of Torland and the Mark and Elland. Their language is based on Old English, and their place names and their personal names are all drawn from Old English. Whereas the Theos up in the north in Grimrick, their culture is very clearly Norse. And if you look at the river that runs by Valfoss. Valfoss is their chief town. Valfoss means slaughter falls, and there's a story behind that you'll encounter in the next book. But also the river is the Mjothelf, which in Norse simply means the Mead River. So I'm stealing from these languages
Yes.
essentially. And then off in the east and in Astrolad, I'm again drawing from the South Asian, from Nepali primarily. But I think a Hindi speaker would almost see like, oh, I kind of recognize that there. So yeah, I'm drawing from real world cultures and languages in order to give my cultures and places a sense of authenticity. And I hope, at least in my mind, at least I'm thinking, this lends with the immersion. This makes this world feel real and lived in. It has layers and that kind of thing, which is to me is important. I feel that as a fantasy writer, one of the things I enjoy is world building and creating a world that can feel like you can be here, you can be
Me
immersed.
too. Me
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
It's real. And in fact, again, we had so much trouble submitting our manuscript for like traditional publishing. And the one editor who was really interested was Matt Bieler. And he literally said to us in his feedback, he said, I'm not going to take you on yet, but I'm also not rejecting you. I think you need to find a developmental editor and you need to develop this and turn it into and work on it. And
yeah,
you can resubmit it to me. That's fine.
yeah,
He's one of his compliments, and he had plenty of criticism, trust me.
yeah.
But one of his compliments is that the world feels real and lived in.
Mm.
And that was very important to me. I want the kind of never-ending story feel. I don't know if you've seen this. It's like silly, like 80s movie. But
Oh yeah,
it's a lot of fun, and I have friends who really like that movie, and I do too. And it's about this kid who like goes up into the attic of his school and skips class, and he opens this book and he's transported. It's kind of a portal story. He's transported into this world. I want it to feel like that.
yeah.
I actually do want that magic. I want people to feel like they can escape and be transported to this world and then learn something and then come back to the real world and their life is different and changed and stuff like that and it's influenced them. And stuff like that. So you definitely did that. You did that for me. Your world definitely felt real and developed and fleshed out, and it felt like it had real source in our shared past as well.
Mhm.
So it's just transitioning a little bit. It's been just over a year, I think, right? When did your first book? Actually, let me ask, when did you publish the third book in this trilogy?
September 21st of 2023. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. So it hasn't even been. When did you publish Way of Edan?
So the Way of Edan was March 21st of
Okay.
2023, and then Prophet was June 21st. So
Okay,
that
gotcha.
anniversary just went by. And then the return to Edan is the September 21st. So I
Okay.
basically, um, and only I was able to do this because I've been working on this trilogy for 18 plus
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So I basically said, I'm going to publish all three in one year, which is one of the advantages of
Yeah. Yeah.
self-publishing, really. So yeah.
Well, that's good pacing so that people who are reading it along with how you're publishing it they don't have to wait too long and they can remember what they read and
That was
stuff
my
like that.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been just over a year then. And so a year out looking back, how do you feel about the series? Are you happy about the reception? How is the book doing just in the general like publishing sense?
Yeah. I can't quit my day job. So I'm very far, far away from being able to quit my day job. I have, however, made some money on the series, so which is probably not something that most self-published authors are going to be able to say. Alas, it is very tough to succeed as a self-published author. That said, I think people should know that these days, it actually you can it neither makes very much money, but on average, a self-published author actually makes a little more than a traditionally published author. That's very, very recent, but I read an article about that about a year ago. So it's neither one is very high though, and but just to be able to say, yeah, I made a little bit of profit on this is really quite something. The idea that people are out there reading the story that was basically existed in here and on my hard drive or whatever for so many years is just so exciting, and I'm so grateful to have anyone who's read this story. It truly makes it feel to me like the story is alive now that there are readers for it. And there are self-published authors who, I know Ryan Cahill, for example, sold about 100,000 books last
That's
year,
amazing.
over 100,000 books in one year, which is wow, he's doing really well. I'm nowhere near that. About a tenth of that essentially is what I'm doing. So I'm not anywhere close to that level. But at the same time, I can't help feeling just an incredible sense of, I feel very gratified. I feel really wonderful that there are people out there who, like I said earlier, who reached out to me and said, wow, this really spoke to me. And, that's what I wanted to accomplish. So I feel like I've done what I wanted to do in that sense. And it is a constant struggle. The one thing I will say about self-publishing, as much as I love the creative freedom, and I love the fact that, look, you've got awesome developmental editors, freelance out there that you can hire if you want to really do your work and do what a traditional publisher would have done. You can do it. You can hire a great artist. You can hire a great cover designer, a map maker, editors, both copy editor and developmental editor. You can really create a great book if you are determined enough to do it. That's possible these days. The one thing that I think is the hardest part of all, though, marketing. That's really tough. And that's a constant battle as a self-published author is how do I get the word out about the book? And how do I get people to know it even exists? That's the struggle, I think, for most people. And, again, this wasn't possible 20, 30 years ago, but now social media has made it possible. If you're willing, if you're crazy enough to just bust yourself doing this, then yeah, you can do it.
I think we both are crazy enough to,
I think we are crazy enough.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think you and I are crazy enough to just maybe just pull it off, and you already have, and so that inspires me.
I mean,
Did
don't do it for money because
what's that?
don't do it for money because you're not going to probably be able to pay your bills with this. But if you're crazy and passionate enough, follow your bliss, do this thing, and maybe you'll be Ryan Cahill. Maybe you'll be, one
That's
of the
right.
individuals who take off, and bless you if that happens. But
That's a very, I mean, you're a very sort of worldly cosmopolitan guy, Philip, but I also think you're very American in ways you may not even realize. You
oh, I'm
are
sure. Yeah.
heading to California for the gold rush and trying your lot, and I think you're pulling it off. But I do want to follow up with that. because that is a very real concern for a lot of people who are publishing or who are trying to publish indie. How much advertising do you find that you have to do, if at all? I know some people just put their book out there, but like then there are other people who get really hands-on in terms of the advertising. How much hustling do you have to do, and how does that work?
Well, you have to do a lot of hustling no matter what. Now, I have not done any advertising myself yet. I'm considering it, but I haven't done any advertising at all. And I've heard mixed feelings that some prominent indie writers have said that in the past, advertising actually paid off, but now it's just such a flooded market that you get no return on that investment whatsoever. So I've heard conflicting ideas about advertising, and I'm no expert, but I'm just passing on what I've heard. I have not myself experimented with advertising, so I can't say a ton about it. I have hustled though a lot, and part of that I said is social media. I'm not super active, but I'm somewhat active on Twitter. I'm part of a community there. I'm part of a community of writers that we support each other on Twitter. When I tweet, I have a sale going on my books. A whole bunch of other writers and reviewers and readers send that tweet along, and I get new readers that way. I do the same thing when I see somebody saying, "I just published my book. I'm going to repost that and maybe even check it out." I also support indie writers by being a judge for SPFBO. I'm so glad that Mark Lawrence asked me to be a judge for the competition, because that is a meaningful way that I felt that I can give back to the community as well. So it's a reciprocal thing. You're a part of a community. Sometimes they help you out, and don't be afraid to ask. And then sometimes you help them out, and that's a beautiful thing. So you have to be part, in other words, do your networking. You have to do that, especially, it's not just, by the way, indie authors, traditionally published authors too, because guess what? To really succeed in traditional publishing, you have to win the lottery 3 times. The first time is when you get an agent. The second time is when that agent gets you a publisher. The third time is when that publisher actually backs your book, because it's the 1 or 2 books that they see succeeding, and they're going to put all their resources behind. And they're going to let all those other books wither on the vine, or basically it's sink or swim for the authors. So doesn't matter if you're self-published or traditionally published, you're going to have to hustle out there. And what we're doing right now, Jordan, we have a presence here on YouTube. It's a wonderful platform.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place. I prefer it much more. I prefer way more than Twitter or
Oh, of
any.
course. I mean,
I'm
there's
not
more
active anywhere
nuance.
else.
It's there's this old like media paradigm of like, I don't know, pick like CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whatever it is,
Right.
and you have 6 minutes and you have 7 experts, and they each get like, you know 14 seconds to deliver their sound bites until the next person gets to say their little sound bite. And it's just so unnuanced. I do think that one of the great things is that people have moved beyond that. I think there's a real hunger. And I just think it's borne out by all of the evidence, whether it's, you look at like podcasts that people are listening to that go the Joe Rogan podcast going for 4 hours long. People will sit there and watch that, or Pod Save America, or whatever the podcast is, these true crime podcasts that people listen to that are hours long, and they just sit there and they love it.
Yeah.
People want, I think there's a real hunger to get out of this, what is it? This conformity that we're doing to people's attention spans,
Yeah.
and returning to this sort of like renaissance of like nuance,
Yep.
and really being able to dig into a topic. And look, my goodness, I wouldn't be doing these long form conversations if they weren't getting viewed, but these are some of my best videos.
Oh,
These
I
are some
love
of my
these.
most watched videos.
I do them anyway. I don't. I mean, I can't say that I don't care at all about views, because my channel would die if
Right,
I
you
didn't.
might do them
Oh,
anyways, but they do happen to be of interest to people.
yeah. Yeah, this is what I live for on YouTube, is conversations. I love discussions of specific books, deep dives, Still love reviews
Yeah.
and things like
Yeah.
that. That's to me the most meaningful. I'm not knocking people who love other things like,
Yeah.
book hauls
Yeah.
or tag videos. That's
It's
great.
all good.
It's all great. But what I really love here, what gives me meaning is the deeper dives, the conversations, the that kind of thing. And I'm so glad that there is an audience for that even. But it is a way to, again, speaking from your author perspective, this is also your networking. You're going to use your channel to tell people, "Hey, I published a book. If you like what I do here on the channel, give it a try." And you
Yeah.
have an audience there. There is nothing wrong with that
Yeah.
whatsoever. I've heard people being critical of those of us who do that. People, the bigger you are, of course, the more flack you're going to get. So Daniel Green was attacked left and right
I
for
can't even imagine what
promoting.
rationale you would have to attack someone for that. That's crazy. Like,
You will find plenty of people who were critical of
but
him.
why? Like the guy is, imagine, like he has a choice. He could go to work and he could work in some factory for, 40 hours a week, and then he could like eke out these like reviews in his spare time on YouTube, or he could stay home, try to make a living, like really immersing himself in the world of fan. And he's not even, I think he's great, but he's not one of my favorite. I wouldn't say he's one of my favorite booktubers, but like
Right.
I think it's really cool that he's like, okay, I can write, now I can
Yep.
make these videos, and why not?
I totally agree with you. And so I kind of struggle to understand the perspective of somebody who's critical of him for busting his ass for years to build a platform and then using that platform to tell people, hey, I wrote these books. If you want to try them, here they are. He's not forcing you. He
Right.
doesn't say you can only watch my videos if you buy my books,
Right. And the market will decide that. Like if he goes on and he starts making his videos entirely about his books and he starts doing like 4 minute advertisements in the middle of his videos, yeah, people will start getting
Right.
annoyed and they won't like it. But
Right.
he's not doing that.
He's not doing
And
that. He's too savvy to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like what's wrong with that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel that my passion for teaching, my passion for discussing books, my passion for reading, my passion for fantasy, and my passion for writing all come from the same place. I can't separate them with a scalpel
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
say, oh, I'm going to separate my writing self here now.
Right.
I just can't do that. It's
Right.
all from the same passion. So I
No.
have no qualms whatsoever about once in a while having a discussion about my books on my channel or telling people, hey, everyone, I'm having a sale, sending out a community post
Right.
or whatever. We're all here to celebrate stories and to celebrate our passion for stories. So to me, it's only logical to combine these things here on this
And as a
platform.
fan, I'll just tell you from my experience, we want to hear about it. It doesn't
Yeah.
annoy me. I don't know who it would annoy, but whatever. Anyways, Philip, what's next then? Speaking of, will you continue writing? Will you write a new series? Or will you stay within the same world, which would be cool as well? What are your plans for that? For some reason, maybe you've already made a decision on that, but I'm not in the know. So what are you doing next?
I actually am working just before I started talking with you. I was editing a book that I have a complete draft of.
Oh.
And it's called Wild Darkness Gathers. And it takes place about 15 years after the third book ends in the trilogy. So I call it a standalone sequel. And it's a shorter book. It's so the Way of Edan is 165,000 words. Prophet is 219,000 words, and Return to Edan is 240,000 words. Whereas I'm quite confident that While Darkness Gathers is going to be under 100,000 words. It's currently at about 90,000. So it's a shorter story. I'm trying a little bit of a different thing. And I'm having a ton of fun right now editing. It is a complete draft. When I finish tweaking it and playing with it, I'm going to send it over to AP to have him work it over and tell me what an idiot I am and 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 make it better. And I'm going to listen to some of his advice and work on it again, and then publish it either at the end of this year or early next year. But I'm excited, and I have already commissioned the cover for it. So yeah.
Same artist. I mean, because your covers right now are very beautiful. And so is it, are you going with the same
Thank
artist,
you.
or are you going a different direction, or?
I'm actually going with the same theme. Now, when I went with the trilogy, I had a really wonderful pair of people. I had Kira Gregory doing the initial art,
Yep.
and then I had Jack
Yeah. Yep.
Shepard.
Yep.
Jack did the map for me as well, by the way, but he did the cover design. And when I say cover design, I've made a couple of videos with Jack if you're curious about that process, because it's
I
it's
would be.
much more than sticking letters on the cover.
Yes, I imagine that.
So
Yeah.
much more than that, actually. He put a lot of time into designing the cover, and he's actually the one who gave this sort of stained glass effect that
Yeah.
I don't know how well you can see
Yeah, I
that
can
on
see it. Yeah.
video, but
Yeah.
he's the one that gave it the stained glass effect. So he really worked hard on this, and that was he told me in one of the videos, I think it was for the third book, there's like 1,000 layers on that in order to give it that stained glass effect.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean he worked hard on it. He's going to be doing the cover by himself actually for this for While Darkness Gathers. And it's going to be a stained glass motif type thing again because we're sticking with that, I guess. But I haven't yet seen it, obviously, but we've talked about the concept, and he's I work on it right as we speak. Maybe that's going to come later. He's actually working on a colored version of the map as well for the special edition of the Way of Edan that's coming out from the Broken Binding
Hmm.
later this summer, probably the very end of the summer. That might be out. So yeah, Jack is wonderful. I really loved working with him, and I'm really happy that he agreed to do the cover for the third book or the sequel. Yeah,
Yeah, so let me ask you, Philip, a blunt question here.
sure.
Um, I don't know how you'll take this, but just bluntly, um, why wasn't this traditionally published? And what I mean by that is I don't understand after reading this how when you submitted this to publishers, they didn't immediately grab it up. This is a compliment. I mean, this is a compliment.
Yes.
I just I don't know. Maybe this is my cynical, like world weary, sort of jaded brain talking, but
Hmm.
and I'm sure you'll correct me. You're a much more enlightened and positive guy than I am.
I don't
Like
know
I
about
feel
that.
like honestly, I feel like 20, 30 years ago, this definitely would have been published, okay? And I
Yeah.
feel like you take someone like R. Scott Baker or Steven Erickson or these sort of people that we revere in modern fantasy today that are doing something different, that are exploring things at a deeper level, who have the kind of background and expertise that you'd. Oh, I'm thinking about Steven Erickson's background in like archaeology and doing like the writer's workshop and doing
Yeah.
all of this, and R. Scott Baker being all but defended with his like philosophy PhD in Canada. And I just I you know, having it's Aesop's fable, it's sour grapes, right? The fox can't reach the grapes, so the fox concludes that the grapes are probably sour anyway. So it's probably my sour grapes. But having just gone through the publishing process, in no way is my book perfect whatsoever, and it has so much that I need to fix. But I know it doesn't suck.
Right.
And what happened when we submitted our book and we went through the querying process, now we did a limited number of queries, but it was like instant rejection. And we could actually look and tell on Query Tracker that either the query letter wasn't being actually read at all. In fact, it was mostly agents were just looking at the word count and were just instantly rejecting. And they were right. We need to cut down our book. We're doing that right now. Um, and then I think there were some people who did read the query letter and they said this in the rejection letter and just said, you know, epic fantasy isn't for me right now, or with the word count, it isn't for me, or just the sort of like knee-jerk rejection letter of like the automatic place card rejection letter. um it's rough out there. It's like, you know, tough room, tough crowd. With your book, having read it and seeing the word count and seeing how accessible it was, but also engaging and also thoughtful, I just don't get it. So maybe you could tell me why you think you did find an agent. And
I did. Yep.
but it's weird. What's going on?
Yeah, I had an agent, a brilliant individual who is actually the president of a major literary agency in New
Is
York
this the
City.
Jabberwocky guy?
He's with Writer's House, actually.
Okay.
Name is Simon Lipscar. He actually is the agent for Christopher Paolini,
Okay. All
the
right.
Aragon books and stuff. So he has some experience with fantasy. He's the agent for a lot. I mean, the guy's
Sure.
a very accomplished literary agent and brilliant. And it was a pleasure to work with him. He could not get a publisher that would take me on. And I did see a little bit of the feedback that he got from the publishers, and I'm interpreting a little bit of the feedback, but I think it's not much of a leap really to interpret it as essentially a lot of very positive comments from these editors. This is a great story, really well told, da da da. But it's not what we're looking for right now. Is the kind of the theme? It's not. This is not where we are right now in traditional publishing.
I got a lot of that too, even just from agents.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because the agents, they want to sell books, and if the publishers aren't interested, they're going to have to pass, on that kind of thing. So, um, yeah, it is the case that it is very competitive out there. It is also the case, and I want to emphasize this, that the people who work in traditional publishing, they're like you and me. They love wonderful stories. They are committed, they are passionate, they want to put out great stories. So I absolutely believe that my very limited interactions with people in traditional publishing is that essentially they love good storytelling too, and they're dealing with the fact of the matter is, Jordan, you and I are weird. Most people in our culture are not readers. There's a very small percentage of people who will read even a book or two a year, and a much smaller percentage of people who read all the time, like we do. We're a very small part of this culture, and so traditional publishers, they have an unenviable position of having to be perceived as gatekeepers because they are essentially they can only produce so many books for this very limited market, and there are so many more of us who want to write now than there used to be. So it's tough. It's really tough. And I will also say that in terms of that feedback that I got, that this is the sort of thing. Now, I'm writing epic fantasy, which is um, very much inspired by European medieval type of influences. I also have, as we've discussed, the South Asian, influence in there as well, but more predominantly, let's say, European medieval influence. Fine.
Mhm.
That's exactly what they're not looking for. Epic fantasy with a European medieval influence, because that sort of thing has been done, and I think there's a sense that fantasy is expanding. Fantasy is becoming more diverse, which I'm actually in favor of. I love that we have more and more fantasy being stories being told from different perspectives about that are using influences from different parts of the world, going places we haven't seen before. I'm a fan. I actually think that that's going to have major payoff for the genre.
Well, me too, but there's also this sense that, and I totally agree with you, and I understand why they're looking for a broader and more diverse set of authors, and they want more stories to be told and more experiences and more backgrounds, and I totally get that.
Yeah.
Um, but they also have to understand who their readers are and
Hmm.
who their audience is. And I know a lot of people who are just out of it because when they go on Amazon or when they go to Barnes and Noble, the stuff on the shelves is just, to them, that's just not what they're looking for. And there's some sense that um, there's a whole political paradigm that I'm sure you've heard of that is very interesting. There are like two theories, two camps. One camp says that politics is downstream from culture, meaning that politics copies or adjusts to or conforms to what the culture is. And there's actually really good data on this. If you actually analyze the Supreme Court and you look at where public perceptions of the issues are, the Supreme Court almost always, I don't know, things like Roe v. Wade aside, for the most part, 90% of the time, the Supreme Court just adjusts to what the public actually believes on a certain issue, almost always, no matter
Right.
what the makeup of the court is. And so there is good evidence for the politics is downstream of culture, meaning if certain
Mhm.
ideas become accepted enough in the popular or the broader culture,
Right.
our politicians, are the people in the courts, they adjust to that and they feel that kind of accountability and pressure. But then there's also the philosophy of culture is downstream from politics, meaning
Mhm.
that in some ways there are times and places. I'll give you a good example of this. I don't know if you know this, but in Germany, East Germany is still 90% atheist,
Mhm.
and West Germany is extremely religious. And of course, that has to do with communism. And the in East Germany, you had Soviet communism, and you basically had a kind of state and well, not a kind of, literally state enforced atheism,
Mhm.
the destruction of churches, all of that. And so in East Germany, they are atheists largely still to this day, like the cultures, the traditions. And in West Germany, they're largely still religious because there was, more freedom. And so I get the sense, sorry, this is like a tangled metaphor, but I get the sense that
Yeah.
that this is my cynical theory, but that in a lot of cases the sort of like like Wesleyan and Oberlin and like Brown graduates who make up like the staffers and the what do I say staffers, they're very small outfits, these publishers
They
who
are actually
work
not
as
that.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know, who work as editors and copy editors and editors for these publishing houses. I think to some degree they feel like they're responsible for shaping taste and culture in a kind of top-down fashion when there
Yeah.
is, and you see this reflected. Patrick just made a video about this, Library of a Viking.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness, Joanna and Tori, like the list goes on and on. I see a new video every week about how people who really are into the stuff that we're into wish that these publishing houses were and these agents and these editors were making different choices than they are making. So what say you to that? Sorry to dump all this like theory on you, but I just wonder if you, because I understand that what you're saying is totally true and correct, but I also think that there's a sense in which the gatekeepers really do need to like respect the people who are buying and reading these books and what we want as well.
Yeah. Well, what I'll say initially is something you mentioned earlier, let the market decide. And, if there are people like you and me who want to write epic fantasy and that may be predominantly European in inspiration, um, if we are able to get the word out about it, people will hopefully recognize the quality and buy it and read it. And thank goodness there's self-publishing. We
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have that option now. And I am a huge champion of it. I feel that this is the best of all possible worlds in a way,
yeah,
because all right, I'm shut out. Maybe I feel I'm a little sore. I didn't get into a traditional publishing deal, and that I could either whine about it and say, "Oh, poor me," when let's be honest, people like me were the only ones almost being published for many, many years.
right, right. That's true.
So let's be fair. There was
Yep, yep,
there's been a long period when you
yep,
were shut out if for different reasons.
for
Uh,
sure.
so thank goodness for self-publishing,
Yeah,
because I do feel that we have the ability to reach an audience, and it's out there. I agree with you that there are readers who want a more modern wrinkle on Lord of the Rings or a new
oh,
Game of Thrones or what have you. So I do believe that there's a place for us,
yeah,
and we don't have to sit here wringing our hands and thinking,
yeah,
"Oh, poor me, what am I going to do?" We can go do it. We can get out there and hustle and write the best possible story
right.
and network and work our butts off and find an audience.
Yes,
And I feel that that's the best of all possible worlds.
yes,
We're having people over in traditional publishing who are expanding the genre in ways that I appreciate. That they're giving voice to authors who would not have been able to publish in the past. I'm applauding that. I'm all for it. If that means I'm excluded okay, well, guess what? I have self-publishing
Right.
to do, and I'm gonna, get to work and let's do
Yeah.
it. That's my philosophy.
That's a
Uh,
great attitude, Philip.
yeah. So that's how I feel. And I'm glad I did it. One of the most liberating decisions I've ever made in my life was the day I decided, and I can remember the feeling still. And I had a great conversation, by the way, with my agent as well, when we decided I'm going to go self-publish, because I had waited for years for a traditional publisher to be interested. When my agent did the last pitch, it took like a year for a traditional publisher, and this was partly because of the pandemic. Okay, so it's not entirely their fault, but it took a year for them even to acknowledge that my agent had submitted the book to them. It took a year, Jordan.
Oh.
It took a whole year. And when I finally said to myself, you know what? I don't want to wait. I'm getting old here. I don't want to wait. I just want to publish now. I'm ready. I worked my butt off on these books.
Yeah.
I worked with this agent. I worked with AP. They're in excellent shape. I think let's just do it. And I have never felt so liberated because I'm not depending on someone else to rescue me. I'm doing it for myself.
Yes.
And so I really feel that it's actually self-publishing because of the viability these days is a really empowering thing. If you're willing to work hard enough on it, that's the thing I want to emphasize because you can write a book and type your last words and type the end. And I promise you that if you were to step away from that book and come back to it, you will see what a piece of crap it is. I'm sorry. It was for me. It
Me
definitely
too.
was. You have to work and work and work at that thing. You have to get really good feedback from people. You have to be willing to do that. And it's not something you can just type the end and go publish it over at KDP and think, yeah, I wrote a book. Okay, if you want to do that, but it's not your best possible story yet.
Yeah.
So you have to work hard at it. You have to be crazy. You have to be passionate, but it's very much viable. So if you're someone like me or like maybe yourself, feeling a little bit frustrated about being shut out of or being perceived as being shut out of the current traditional publishing market, I want to emphasize if anything sticks from this discussion, it's go for it, self-publish, do it, and be prepared to work your butt off. So
I
yeah.
love it. Thank you for that, Philip. That's very inspiring. And I think you have a really, really well-adjusted, mature, and just good attitude. I think that gives me a lot of hope, just the way that you're approaching this and things like that. And so I think I have like two more questions. So can you go into the actual process of indie publishing? Like what
Sure.
goes into it? What do you have to do on your end? I know this is a lot and you feel free to distill it. What does that process look like if you'd be able to semi walk me through that? Because one of the great things about indie publishing, at least it seems to me, is that you do, as you say, have more control over what the book looks like. You hired an artist and you had someone do your map. These are opportunities that you don't have a lot of times. Traditional publishing is to actually choose what your book looks like, what your map looks like, how everything's
Almost never.
formatted and
You'd
laid
never have a
out.
say in your cover in traditional publishing. Yeah.
I know. I know. I was talking to Christopher and he was like, yeah, I basically controlled the art for my book. And apparently I'm the only one who has ever been able to do that ever. He was
Yeah.
like, he was saying like, please don't take this as the norm. Because we did a conversation about like indie versus traditional. And he said, it is not usually like that. I don't know how that worked out, but they did give me control over
Wow.
more than less
I've talked
control.
to authors, I'm not going to say who, but who hate their covers.
Yeah.
They had no say in them. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were able to put these books out on your own timeline, but at the same time, there's a lot of learning and activation energy that the whole thing requires too, and responsibility. So I'm wondering if you could just walk me briefly through that process of what it looks like to go from, all right, I've done the work. I made the corrections that AP asked. I reshaped this. These books are ready to go. I've worked on them Now I'm ready to publish. How does that process look?
Yeah. Oh, just briefly too, I'll mention, I know one other author who has had a say in her covers, not only a say, but she actually painted the covers herself, and that's Jenny Wirtz. So yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that. Wow, those are great covers
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, she's amazing. She is talented in too many realms. It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, the process of self-publishing. So let's assume you've done all that hard work that I was just talking about, that you have written a book, you've edited, gone over it a million times. You had everybody you know go over it. It's expensive. I want to acknowledge that, to hire editors. It is very expensive. I hired a developmental editor. You have as well. I did not hire a copy editor. That's a slightly different thing because I feel that I'm an English professor. I've spent 2.5
Same here.
decades working
I
at
grade papers for a
correcting
living. I'm
papers.
extremely meticulous and assiduous.
Yeah,
I'm not getting a copy editor.
right. I'm saving myself that money, but I'm working my tail off to find all those little,
Yes.
typos and everything. So let's assume you've done all that. All
Right.
that stuff is done. Your book is shiny and it's ready to go. So you do need an artist. I highly recommend not using AI. Um, whatever your feelings about AI might be, please know that there are many readers who will not touch your book if you have an AI art on it. So I recommend staying away from AI entirely, whether it be, and there are people who will have AI write a book and then they'll tweak it, or they'll have AI write. I just heard on Twitter about an author who apparently has AI write the sex scenes and yeah, and then tweaks the sex scenes.
Well, I have a wife and I'm a co-author with her. And
Uh,
one of the funny things is, AP would probably be mad at me for saying this, but one of the things, we do have a sex scene in our book, and AP was
uh,
like, that sex scene wasn't too bad.
oh wow.
And I want to tell him, like, my wife wrote it. That's why.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
It's not a
That's
man
better than
writing it.
AI. That's better than AI. So, but anyway, yeah, well, you've worked your butt off. You have this beautiful shiny book. You're ready to go. So hire an artist, have a vision for your cover. That, for in my case, I wanted stained glass window covers because that fit with the religious themes in there. It made sense to me. So I had an idea of which scenes I wanted portrayed. I had a vision that was, I felt, consonant with the themes of the story, that sort of thing. So work with an artist. By the way, if you work with a relatively well-known artist, you need to engage that person months and months, maybe a year in advance, because they are very busy. And the more prominent they are, the more you're going to have to pay. If you have an artist who actually paints, that could easily cost you $3,000-4,000. If you have an artist who, like mine, generated this digitally, then that's less expensive. But I still spent a good amount of money for my artist and my cover designer for each book. So uh, in the thousands. And I'm happy, totally happy with that. And I realize that's an investment. There are people out there who are writing who don't, like you and I, have steady day jobs, and maybe it's hard. So I do get it. So please don't. I'm aware that I hope I don't come across as being unaware that there are people who would struggle to afford some of these things. That's absolutely the case, because they estimate that to self-publish a book, you're going to spend anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. Not everybody has $10,000 sitting around to publish their book, especially knowing that most people may not even make a profit on that. So that's, let's be real about all that. So you have to engage with all that. Now you have to decide where, once all that's in place, you have to decide where you're going to publish this thing. You have options as a self-published author. The most famous and the one that probably most people end up working with, at least for the ebook, is going to be KDP. That's the
Yeah.
Amazon's publishing wing, self-publishing wing. So KDP I was advised by some really wonderful self-published authors that would be the most logical place to go because they just have such a huge chunk of the ebook market. The downside of that is it's Amazon exclusive. You can't make your ebook available anywhere else except Amazon. So be aware of that. I feel bad when I get a comment on a video saying, I'd love to buy your ebook, but I don't go through Amazon. Do you have a, no, I can't. I don't go through anywhere else because Amazon doesn't let me. And that's the way it is, unfortunately. That's where I went with my ebook, and I also do. I've enrolled in the KDP Unlimited program, where if you're a person who subscribes to that, you can essentially you pay a monthly fee to read as much as you want. And if books are available on KDP Unlimited, you can access the book and
I
download.
have that actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And a lot of people love that. And that I think I was advised in advance that's a significant revenue stream for a self-published author, and you should do that. So that's the route I went. Now, for the physical book, I actually went two routes, and you can do this. It's perfectly, there's nothing illegal or untoward about this. I did go through Amazon as well for a physical version. Let's see, this is the Ingram Spark version I'm holding
It
up.
looks great,
Yeah.
Philip.
I'm happy with both. Now, there are people who say Ingram Spark covers tend to be a little more vibrant than the Amazon covers for the physical books. And I actually agree with that. A little bit, not a huge difference, but there's a little bit more vibrancy to the KDP or to the Ingram Spark cover. But I went with both because there are a lot of entities out there, libraries, other bookstores that don't like to play with Amazon. So by publishing through both, the majority of my sales are still through Amazon, but I have still a pretty good chunk of sales. About 10% of my sales are through Ingram Spark. And these are books that people have ordered through Barnes and Noble, or libraries have ordered, or other online. I've seen my books being advertised by online bookstores in the UK and in Germany. They're getting the books from Ingram Spark. And they won't be ordering from Amazon. So if you want people, libraries, and other bookstores to be able to sell your book, the physical book, you need to go through something like Ingram Spark, which is probably outside of KDP, the most well-known self-publishing platform, I think, is probably Ingram Spark. But there are others out there that you can investigate. There are whole articles online about who are the different platforms and what they offer, what their strengths and weaknesses are. I recommend doing your homework and reading up on all that. So yeah. And then you have to there's a whole process of getting your manuscript onto their platform, getting your cover on there. It's just, if I can do it, let me say, then I'm kind of a tech idiot. Then I'm sure most people can figure it out. But it is a bit of a process learning how to do all that. Yeah.
Me too. Well, I wouldn't say I'm a Luddite, but I'm a tech idiot and I'm a boomer when it comes to technology. I'm just completely clumsy with it, and I mess up all the time, and it's constantly frustrating to me. My brain just doesn't work that way. My wife's pretty good with it.
Oh, good. Yeah.
But speaking of my wife, last question I want to ask you here. She had a question for you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Because I asked her, "Do you have any questions for him? I've got this author here. I've snared him, and would you like to ask him a question?" And she said, "Now that you've gone through the process, what do you wish you'd known before indie publishing? Like, is there anything that you've learned or come to understand that you've come to understand that in retrospect you would have done differently now looking back?"
Well, thank you, Nikki, for the question. I wish I had gone to self-publishing sooner. That is my
Oh,
only regret, that I spent so many years waiting. So that is my biggest revelation was, wow, I should have done this much sooner. So yeah, I have zero regrets about doing it. Instead of having no audience, I have an audience, and
right.
it's been so meaningful and so fulfilling to be able to do it this way, to be able to, and I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be able to have a vision for my own book covers and to be able to say, I'm going to put 3 books out in 1 year because I want to give
Yeah.
that to my readers who maybe want to just read all the books. Uh, I don't think a traditional publisher would have allowed me to do that. It's pretty safe assumption that you wouldn't see that. Who is this guy wanting to have his 3 books published in one
They'd be
year?
separated by a year at least, probably.
At least, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I wish I had done it sooner. That's my only real epiphany for you, I think, Jordan, is that I would, if you're willing to do the work, that's the caveat here. If you're willing to do the work, I say just go for self-publishing, embrace it, and enjoy that process. I have found it to be very fulfilling.
I'm glad to hear that. And it's interesting. Like, I am willing to do the work. I have a ton of intellectual energy still,
Yep.
even at my ripe old age of about to turn 37 in September. I have a ton of intellectual energy. I can totally imagine doing this. And and I see it as a very viable and compelling way forward. And I just might. I really just might. If it's looking like it isn't going to work out, I'm not going to wait a long time.
Don't despair. Yeah, don't
I'm
despair.
not. I'm gonna launch into. I want to make sure my books are ready, and that my book is good and it's ready to go, and that it's not that I'm not just putting something out there because I'm anxious or because it's been a long time and I want. No, I want to make sure I'm putting out something that I'm totally proud of, and that
Yes.
I'm sure you've experienced, a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road, you look back at your book and you don't have that many. Every author has some regrets, but that
Oh yeah.
you're not like, oh God, you're not embarrassed or
What
ashamed
was
that
I
you,
thinking? Yeah.
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 But okay, then just real quick, is there an audiobook there? You said Alan, Alan from Alexandria. He's actually, to my viewers, by the way, uh, I just confirmed this with him yesterday. Alan is coming on the channel
Oh,
on
good.
July 3rd. So that
All
should be a
right.
nice conversation, and I'm looking forward to that. He did come on, I think, actually with Philip a few months ago when Jimmy was on and Joanna was on. It
Yes.
was a kind of a
Yes.
big party. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll be doing a one-on-one pretty soon here. I think Alan's doing the audiobook, you said, and you said that maybe that might come out in July. That'd be pretty good.
I did just recently hear from Alan, and I can confidently say that he's going to be done in probably early July.
Oh, fantastic.
So I'll have to, obviously put it on Audible or wherever I end up putting
That's
it.
not hard.
Yep. So that'll
Yep.
happen. So I'm feeling pretty good about this thing being out there in July, perhaps by the end of July. The audio book, as narrated by Alan from the Library of Alexandria. And I want you to pick his brain about it when you see him, if it comes up, because I think he's done something really brilliant with this. I have heard clips of his reading,
Oh,
and if you know
great.
anything about Alan, you know that he does voices. He has all of these
Yes.
crazy voices that he can do.
Yes.
And he has made these characters very distinct with their own voices. So I feel like he has a possible career in being a
Yes.
narrator. And I'm
Totally
really,
worth the wait. Wow, man, that's so exciting. That's
yep, yep.
about to happen.
It really is. It's about to happen. I feel like Alan deserves to really take off as an. I'm not just saying it because he narrated my book, but I hope that my trilogy will only be the very beginning for him.
For his audiobook narrator career. Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
yeah.
I could see him being a great audiobook narrator. All right, well, thank you, Philip. This was a lovely conversation as always, and I'm looking forward to talking with you,
You're gonna be
Nikki.
on my channel,
It'll be along, yeah, in
actually
August, and
this summer in August. Yeah.
so looking forward to that. And yeah, thanks for coming on, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom, and be well.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate you inviting me. I've enjoyed this discussion tremendously. Like I said in the beginning, this is a very meaningful thing for me to be able to talk with a fellow author and someone who's obviously very thoughtful about storytelling and passionate about it. This is really wonderful. So I really appreciate it.
I can't wait to review this book and then on to book two. So let's keep it going. All right, thank you.